Millionaire rescues starving triplets. What he discovers the next day breaks his heart. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Rain pounded against the windows of Alexander Bennett's office on the 50th floor of the Bennett Tower. At 45, Alexander had built Bennett Enterprises into a billion-dollar empire from nothing, transforming himself from a small-town boy with big dreams into one of Manhattan's most powerful men. "Sir, these quarterly reports need your signature," his assistant said, placing a stack of papers on his immaculate desk. Alexander nodded curtly, barely looking up. The board meeting had been contentious, with Victoria, his former business partner, questioning his recent decisions. After 15 years together, she'd become his most formidable adversary, hungry for control of what he'd built. "Will you be needing the car tonight, Mr. Bennett?" asked Richard, his driver of 10 years. "Yes, just give me 30 minutes. Outside, the autumn rain had turned the city sidewalks into shimmering mirrors. Alexander stepped from the building, his Italian leather shoes immediately soaked by a puddle. The discomfort deepened his scowl as he waited for Richard to bring the car around. That's when he saw them. 3 small boys huddled in the doorway of a closed shop across the street. They couldn't have been more than 7, identical in every way with dark hair and hollow cheeks. One held out a paper cup to passing strangers, who quickened their steps to avoid the children. Alexander looked away. Not his problem. He had enough on his plate with Victoria's attempted corporate takeover. The smallest boy caught his eye, and something in that gaze, a mixture of hope and resignation, made Alexander pause. Against his better judgment, he crossed the street. "Shouldn't you boys be home?" he asked, his voice sharper than intended. "We need money for food, mister," the one holding the cup said. "We haven't eaten since yesterday." Alexander studied them more carefully. Triplets, unmistakably, wearing clothes too thin for the October chill. The boy on the left had a fresh bruise on his cheek. "Where are your parents?" The boys exchanged glances. "Mom's gone," the one in the middle whispered. "And Ray says we can't come home until we bring enough money." The sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb. "Sir?" Richard called, holding the door. Alexander stood frozen, rainwater streaming down his face. The sensible thing would be to call social services and continue with his evening. He had a company to save. But something about those 3 identical faces, somehow both fearful and defiant, stirred something long dormant inside him. "Are you hungry now?" he heard himself asking. 3 heads nodded simultaneously. "Richard," Alexander called. "Change of plans." Alexander watched with genuine surprise as the 3 identical boys devoured cheeseburgers and fries at the 24-hour diner. The waitress cast sympathetic glances their way, clearly wondering about the strange group, a suited businessman and 3 bedraggled children. "So you're triplets," Alexander said, breaking the awkward silence. "What are your names?" The boy, with the bruised cheek, spoke first. "I'm Noah." "I'm Ethan," said the middle one who had held the cup. "Lucas," whispered the smallest, mouth still full of fries. "And how old are you?" "7, they answered in unison, then looked at each other and giggled, the first childlike sound Alexander had heard from them. Outside, the rain intensified. Alexander checked his watch, nearly midnight. His penthouse would be empty and cold. As always, truthfully, he hated returning to it. "Where does Ray live?" Alexander asked carefully. The smiles disappeared. 43rd and Vine, Noah answered. "The apartment with the broken steps." Alexander's jaw tightened. "One of the worst neighborhoods in the city. He'll be mad if we come back without enough money," Ethan whispered. The waitress approached with the bill. "Your boys are precious," she said warmly. Alexander opened his mouth to correct her, then stopped. "Thank you," he replied instead. A crack of thunder shook the diner windows. Lucas flinched, instinctively moving closer to Alexander's side. "It's just thunder," Alexander said awkwardly, unfamiliar with comforting children. "Nothing to be afraid." His phone buzzed. Victoria, likely with more threats about tomorrow's board meeting. He silenced it without answering. "Listen, boys," Alexander said finally. It's getting late and this storm is dangerous. My house has plenty of room. Would you like to stay there tonight just until morning? The triplets exchanged their mysterious identical sibling looks, communicating silently. Ray checks on us in the morning, Noah said cautiously. I'll handle Ray, Alexander replied, surprising himself with the protective edge in his voice. Richard raised an eyebrow but said nothing when Alexander appeared with 3 children in tow. The triplets' eyes widened at the sight of the Bentley. Is this a spaceship? Lucas whispered, making Alexander chuckle despite himself. As they pulled into the private garage beneath his penthouse building, Alexander realized with sudden clarity that his immaculate minimalist home had never hosted children before. Mrs. Patterson, his housekeeper, would have a fit. Watching the boys taking in his marble foyer with awestruck expressions, Alexander felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with business victories or crushing competitors. This is the castle from the storybooks, Ethan breathed. Just for tonight, Alexander reminded them, and himself. But as he led them upstairs, something told him that nothing about his carefully ordered life would ever be the same again. Mrs. Patterson's face was a study in shock when she arrived the next morning to find 3 identical boys eating cereal at the kitchen island. Alexander, still in yesterday's rumpled shirt, looked equally out of place making toast. Mr. Bennett, I wasn't aware we were expecting guests, she said, her British composure barely concealing her surprise. It was an emergency situation, Alexander explained quickly. Just for one night. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened as she observed the boys' worn clothing and Noah's fading bruise. With 30 years of experience managing households, she recognized signs of neglect. I'll prepare proper breakfast, she announced, already rolling up her sleeves. While the boys ate pancakes, Alexander slipped into his office to make calls, first to his assistant to reschedule morning meetings, then to his security chief. I need information on a man named Ray, 43rd and Vine, he instructed. Likely abusing 3 children. Be discreet. When he returned, the boys were helping Mrs. Patterson with dishes, something Alexander had never done himself. We should go, Noah said, ever the protective one. Ray checks at noon. Alexander felt an unexpected reluctance. Actually, I thought perhaps we could get you some new clothes first. Before they could respond, the doorbell rang. Security called up. Ms. Caldwell insists on seeing you, sir. Victoria, the last person he needed right now. Send her up. Alexander sighed, giving Mrs. Patterson a meaningful look. She nodded, guiding the boys toward the kitchen. Victoria strode in, impeccably dressed as always. Her stiletto heels clicked aggressively against marble floors. Missed you at the Westbrook meeting, she said coldly. The Japanese investors were disappointed. Her eyes narrowed. Who does that cereal belong to? Before Alexander could answer, Lucas appeared in the doorway. Mr. Alexander, can I have more juice? He froze when he saw Victoria. Victoria's perfectly arched eyebrows raised. Babysitting now, Alexander? Or is there something you haven't told the board? It's complicated, Alexander replied. Naturally, Ethan and Noah appeared then, drawn by their brother's absence. Triplets, Victoria observed. How? Interesting. Alexander moved protectively toward the boys. Victoria, we can discuss business tomorrow. She studied him with calculating eyes. The board meeting is in 3 hours. Your controlling interest hangs by a thread, and you're playing house? She lowered her voice. You look terrible. What game are you playing? No game, Alexander replied, firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us. After Victoria left, promising consequences, Alexander knelt before the worried-looking triplets. Are you in trouble because of us? Ethan asked. Alexander should have said yes. These children were derailing everything. Instead, he found himself saying, some things are more important than business meetings. And in that moment, to his own astonishment, he actually meant it. Alexander straightened his tie as the elevator ascended to the Bennett Enterprises boardroom. For the first time in 20 years, he felt uncertain about a business confrontation. The triplets sat quietly beside him, fidgeting in their new clothes. Simple but well-made outfits purchased during a whirlwind morning shopping trip, after Mrs. Patterson pointed out they couldn't keep wearing the same dirty clothes. "Remember what we talked about?" Alexander asked gently. Noah nodded seriously. "Sit quietly in your office with Mrs. Patterson while you have your meeting. And don't touch anything expensive," added Ethan. "And be good," finished Lucas with a small smile. The elevator doors opened, revealing the shocked face of Alexander's assistant, Claire. "Mr. Bennett, the board is waiting and oh." Her eyes widened at the sight of the three identical boys. "These are my guests," Alexander said firmly. "Please show them to my office where Mrs. Patterson is waiting." Whispers followed them down the hallway. Alexander could practically feel the corporate rumor mill spinning into overdrive. As Claire guided the boys away, Victoria emerged from the boardroom, her smile freezing when she spotted the children. "You brought them here?" she hissed. "Are you deliberately trying to destroy your reputation?" "I had no childcare alternatives," Alexander replied coolly. "This is exactly what I've been warning the board about," Victoria said. "Your judgment is compromised. First the Westbrook deal, now this distraction." Alexander felt a surge of anger. "Those distractions have names, Victoria." Inside the boardroom, 12 executives fell silent as Alexander entered. Chairman Whitfield raised an eyebrow. "Alexander, we were beginning to wonder if you'd join us." "My apologies for the delay," Alexander replied, taking his seat at the head of the table. Victoria remained standing. "Before we begin, I believe there's an elephant in the room, or rather, 3 small elephants." Her smile was razor-sharp. "Alexander appears to have adopted some. Children without informing the board." Murmurs rippled around the table. "My personal life is not board business," Alexander stated firmly. "It is when it affects your judgment," Victoria countered. "Alexander has been distracted, missing critical meetings, making impulsive decisions. The Westbrook deal was flawed," Alexander interrupted. "Their financials didn't support the asking price." "A convenient excuse," Victoria replied. "I move that we consider temporary leadership alternatives while Alexander sorts through his domestic situation." Before Alexander could respond, a crash echoed from his office, followed by crying. Without hesitation, he stood. "Excuse me for a moment." "Alexander," Victoria called sharply. "We're in the middle of a vote." He paused at the door. "Then vote. Some things are more important." In his office, he found Lucas crying over a broken crystal award that had fallen from the shelf. Mrs. Patterson was already cleaning up. "I'm sorry," Lucas sobbed. "I just wanted to see it." For a man whose reputation was built on perfectionism and control, Alexander's response surprised even himself. He knelt beside the tearful boy. "It's just a thing, Lucas. Things can be replaced." Alexander's penthouse gradually transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Pristine white couches now sported colorful throw pillows. The sterile kitchen housed dinosaur-shaped cereal boxes alongside Alexander's gourmet coffee. And most surprisingly, laughter periodically echoed through spaces that had known only silence. "Mr. Alexander, watch this," Lucas called from the living room where he was attempting a precarious stack of building blocks. "One moment," Alexander replied, finishing a business call in his home office. Another new development. After the disastrous board meeting where Victoria had succeeded in suspending several of his executive powers pending review, Alexander had begun working remotely 3 days a week. Mrs. Patterson entered with fresh coffee. "The boys need school supplies," she mentioned casually, "if they're staying longer." Alexander looked up sharply. "It's still temporary," he said, though with less conviction than a week ago. Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile irritated him. "Of course, sir. Temporary. Just like the pediatrician appointment I scheduled for tomorrow and the bunk beds being delivered this afternoon." Before Alexander could respond, his security chief James called. "I have information on Ray Dodson," he reported. 3 prior convictions for fraud, currently on probation. According to neighbors, he took in the boys after their mother died last year. She was his girlfriend, not their biological mother. No father in the picture. And the abuse? Multiple witnesses confirm seeing the boys with injuries. Ray forces them to beg daily. Takes whatever they collect. Alexander's jaw tightened. Options? We could report to CPS, but the system's overloaded. Foster care would likely separate them. The thought of the triplets being split up created an unexpected ache in Alexander's chest. Keep monitoring, Ray, he instructed. I need time to figure this out. Later, Alexander observed the boys during dinner, a family-style meal Mrs. Patterson had begun serving instead of his usual solitary plate. Each triplet revealed distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Noah, protective and serious. Ethan, thoughtful and observant. Lucas, imaginative and affectionate. Do we have to go back to Ray soon? Ethan asked suddenly, forky, pausing mid-bite. The question hung in the air. The temporary arrangement had already stretched to 9 days. Not yet, Alexander answered carefully. But we can't stay forever, Noah said, always practical. This isn't our home. Alexander found himself struggling with unfamiliar emotions. These boys had completely disrupted his life, his work, his pristine home. Victoria was using their presence to challenge his leadership. By any logical measure, they were a liability. Yet watching them now, Lucas demonstrating how dinosaurs would eat spaghetti, Ethan carefully aligning his carrots by size, Noah making sure his brothers had enough water, Alexander realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. Actually, he heard himself saying, "You can stay as long as you need to." The identical faces turned toward him, hope and wariness battling in their expressions. And Alexander, who had built an empire through calculated decisions and emotional detachment, found himself hoping they would stay forever. The peace that had settled over Alexander's penthouse shattered one afternoon when Mrs. Patterson frantically called him during a critical investor meeting. "Sir, there's a man here, Ray Dodson. He's demanding to see the boys, making terrible threats. Security is holding him in the lobby, but he's claiming kidnapping. He says he'll go to the police." Alexander felt ice form in his veins. "I'm on my way. Keep the boys in the playroom. Don't tell them anything." When Alexander arrived, he found a thin, wiry man with bloodshot eyes pacing the marble lobby. 2 security guards flanked him nervously. "You Bennett?" Ray demanded. "Where? Are my kids?" Alexander approached with controlled fury. "They're not yours, and based on their condition when I found them, you have no right to call yourself their guardian," Ray sneered. "Check the paperwork, rich man. Their mother left them to me. They're my meal ticket, and I want them back. Now." "Those meal tickets are children," Alexander replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Children you've been abusing and exploiting." "Prove it," Ray challenged. "Meanwhile, I'll be talking to the cops about how a billionaire kidnapped 3 kids from their legal guardian. Wonder what your fancy board will think about that headline." The threat hung in the air. Alexander realized with startling clarity that Ray had found his weakness, the company. The same vulnerability Victoria was exploiting. "How much?" Alexander asked coldly. Ray's eyes gleamed. "Now we're talking. 500 grand. Cash. And I disappear, paperwork and all. You'd sell children for money?" Alexander's disgust was palpable. "You're buying them, aren't you?" Ray countered. Before Alexander could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Victoria. "Emergency board vote in 1 hour. Your presence required. Final chance to save your position." The timing couldn't be worse. If he missed this meeting, Victoria would seize control of his company. 20 years of work gone. But if he left now, Ray might somehow get to the boys. "Security will escort you out," Alexander told Ray firmly. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. Touch those boys again and I'll make sure you're in prison by nightfall." As Ray was led away shouting threats, Alexander's phone rang again. "Victoria, the vote's starting, Alexander. Where are you?" Alexander looked toward the elevator, thinking of 3 small boys who trusted him to keep them safe. "I'm handling something more important," he replied, and hung up. Upstairs, he found the triplets building a fort from couch cushions. blissfully unaware of the threat below or the corporate coup unfolding across town. "Mr. Alexander," Lucas called excitedly. "You're home early." In that moment, facing those innocent faces, Alexander Bennett, feared business titan, notorious workaholic, realized what truly mattered. His company might fall today, but these boys would never again feel abandoned. Alexander sat in his home office reviewing the damage to his corporate position. The emergency board vote had stripped him of operational control, though he retained his title and ownership stake. Victoria now effectively ran day-to-day operations. 20 years of building an empire, sidelined in a single afternoon because he'd chosen 3 boys over a meeting. Strangely, he felt no regret. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Noah stood in the doorway, serious as always. "Mrs. Patterson said you're not the boss of your company anymore," he said bluntly. "Because of us." Alexander motioned him inside. "It's complicated, Noah, but not your fault. We should go back to Ray so you can fix your company," Noah said with the heartbreaking practicality of a child who'd learned to sacrifice himself too young. "Absolutely not," Alexander replied firmly. "Ray is not a good person." Noah studied him with those penetrating eyes that seemed too old for a 7-year-old. "Why are you helping us? Really?" The question caught Alexander off guard. Why indeed? 3 weeks ago he wouldn't have spared a glance for street children. What had changed? Before he could formulate an answer, James arrived with a folder. "The information you requested, sir." After Noah left, Alexander opened the file. Inside were birth certificates for the triplets, their mother's death certificate, and something unexpected, a photograph of a young woman holding 3 newborn infants. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face. Alexander searched his memory, certain he'd seen her before. His phone rang. His lawyer, Sophia. "I've filed for emergency temporary guardianship," she reported. "Given Ray's criminal record, we have a chance. But he's making noise about going to the press with a billionaire kidnapping story. Handle it," Alexander instructed, "whatever it costs." After hanging up, he returned to the photograph. Who was this woman? Why did she seem familiar? A commotion from the living room drew his attention. He found Ethan emptying a battered shoebox onto the carpet. "What's this?" Alexander asked. "Our treasure box," Lucas explained. "We kept Mom's stuff in it." The contents were pitifully few: a lipstick, a bracelet, some photographs, and several envelopes. "She wrote letters," Ethan said, handling the envelopes reverently. "To our dad." Alexander froze. "Your father?" Noah appeared, looking troubled. "She said he was very important and loved us, but couldn't be with us." With shaking hands, Alexander picked up one of the letters. The address line read simply, "Michael." His heart nearly stopped. Michael, his younger brother who had died in a climbing accident 8 years ago. "May I?" he asked hoarsely, indicating the letter. The boys nodded. Alexander carefully opened the envelope. Dated 8 years ago. The letter inside began, "Dearest Michael, the boys are starting to look more like you every day." Alexander stared at the triplets with new eyes, seeing now what his subconscious had recognized from the beginning. The Bennett family chin, his brother's eyes, the same cowlick in their dark hair. The impossible truth dawned on him. These weren't just random children he'd rescued. These were his nephews. The revelation struck Alexander like a physical blow. He stared at the letter, then back at the 3 identical faces watching him curiously. The boys weren't just any children. They were Michael's sons, his brother's legacy, his own flesh and blood. "Did you know our dad?" Ethan asked, breaking the charged silence. Alexander struggled to find words. How could he explain that their father had been his twin brother, that he'd lost track of Michael during his wild, adventurous years before his death, that somehow, impossibly, their paths had converged again through these 3 small boys? "Yes," he finally managed. "I knew him very well." "Was he nice?" Lucas asked hopefully. "The best," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "Brave, kind, always laughing. You have his eyes, all 3 of you." The boys exchanged glances, that silent communication passing between them again. "If you knew our dad," Noah said carefully, "and we're staying with you now, does that make you like our uncle or something?" The word uncle resonated through Alexander's chest. "Something like that," he replied softly. Before he could elaborate, the elevator chimed. Alexander tensed, expecting Ray or perhaps Victoria. Instead, Mrs. Patterson appeared with Sophia, his lawyer. "Sir, Ms. Morgan is here with urgent news." Sophia's expression was grimly triumphant. "Ray Dodson has been arrested for probation violation. He was caught trying to sell the boy's guardianship paperwork to a tabloid reporter. My investigator recorded everything." Relief flooded Alexander, quickly followed by resolve. "Then we move forward with the adoption petition immediately." "Adoption?" Lucas echoed, eyes widening. Alexander realized he'd spoken without thinking, words manifesting his heart's decision before his mind had fully processed it. But looking at these boys, Michael's sons, his nephews, he knew with absolute certainty that they belonged with him. "If that's what you want," he added carefully. What followed was a moment Alexander would remember for the rest of his life. 3 identical bodies launching themselves at him simultaneously, small arms wrapping around his neck and waist, tears and laughter mingling as they embraced. "Really forever?" Lucas asked. "Really forever," Alexander confirmed, something breaking, open inside him. The wall he'd built after Michael's death. The emotional barricade that had made him a feared businessman but a lonely man. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Alexander sat looking at old photographs of himself and Michael as children. The resemblance between his brother and the triplets was undeniable now that he knew to look for it. His phone rang. "Victoria." "The Japanese investors are withdrawing," she said without preamble. "You've got 48 hours to save the company." Would Michael have wanted this? Alexander asked. The question meant more for himself than Victoria. "What?" "Nothing," he replied. "I'll handle it tomorrow." 24 hours ago, such news would have sent him into crisis mode. Now, watching 3 small boys sleeping peacefully, down the hall, Alexander Bennett discovered that his priorities had fundamentally, irrevocably changed. Alexander stood at the glass wall of his home office, gazing at the Manhattan skyline while on the phone with his financial team. In just 1 week, the temporary guardianship papers had been filed, DNA tests confirmed the triplets were indeed Michael's sons, and the adoption process had begun. But while his personal life was falling into place, his professional world was crumbling. "The stock has dropped 17% since Victoria took operational control," his CFO reported grimly. "Major clients are getting nervous. We need you back at the helm, Alexander." "I'm working on it," he replied, watching the triplets building, an elaborate racetrack in the living room. "Have the documents ready for tomorrow's meeting." As he ended the call, Mrs. Patterson appeared with a troubled expression. "Sir, there's someone from Child Protective Services here. She's insisting on an immediate home inspection." Alexander's stomach tightened. This wasn't scheduled. Victoria's handiwork, undoubtedly. The CPS worker, Ms. Reynolds, was brisk and clearly skeptical. "We've received concerns about the suitability of your home environment, Mr. Bennett. I understand you've never had children before, but suddenly have 3 in your care." "They're my nephews," Alexander explained, guiding her through the penthouse. "Their father was my brother." Ms. Reynolds made notes while inspecting the boys' bedroom, now fully furnished with bunk beds, desks, and toys. "And you've only recently discovered this connection?" Before Alexander could answer, Lucas burst in. "Mr. Alexander, Noah's hurt." In the living room, Noah sat clutching his arm, face pale with pain. "I fell off the couch," he admitted through gritted teeth. Without hesitation, Alexander scooped him up. "We're going to the hospital. Mrs. Patterson, please show Ms. Reynolds out." "Mr. Bennett, this interview isn't complete," Ms. Reynolds protested. "My nephew needs medical attention," Alexander said firmly. "Feel free to reschedule." At the hospital, X-rays confirmed a simple fracture. As Noah's arm was being cast, Alexander's phone buzzed with urgent messages about tomorrow's board meeting. "You should go to your meeting," Noah said quietly. noticing Alexander's distraction. "We're used to taking care of ourselves." The comment, delivered with such matter-of-fact acceptance, struck Alexander to his core. These boys had been forced to be self-sufficient in the worst possible ways. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, squeezing Noah's good hand. By the time they returned home, Ms. Reynolds had filed her report, unfavorable, citing Alexander's obvious lack of childcare experience and concerning professional distractions. Sophia called with the news. Victoria also filed a formal objection to the adoption, claiming your company's instability makes you an unsuitable guardian. Alexander felt a cold fury building. "She's using these boys as pawns to take my company." "It's working," Sophia admitted. "The judge is concerned. We need to prove your commitment to both the children and the company." After hanging up, Alexander found the triplets in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson, making cookies one-handed to cheer up Noah. "Are we in trouble?" Ethan asked, sensing Alexander's mood. Alexander looked at their worried faces and made his decision. "No, but I need to ask you something important. Tomorrow, would you come with me to a meeting to meet the people I work with?" The choice was clear now. He wouldn't separate his worlds any longer. If saving his company meant showing everyone exactly why these boys mattered more, then that's what he would do. The Bennett Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Alexander entered with 3 identical boys. Noah's arm in a cast, all 3 dressed in matching navy suits that mirrored Alexander's own. Victoria's smile froze mid-conversation with board members. "Gentlemen, ladies," Alexander began, guiding the triplets to seats beside him. "Before we discuss the company's future, I'd like to introduce you to Noah, Ethan, and Lucas Bennett." Murmurs rippled around the table at the use of his surname. "Bennett?" Victoria questioned sharply. "Yes," Alexander confirmed. "My nephews, my brother Michael's sons." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Everyone in the room had known Michael, the free-spirited twin who had rejected the corporate world before his tragic death. "Impossible," Victoria scoffed. "Michael would have told us." "He didn't know," Alexander replied evenly. "I've confirmed through DNA testing that these boys are his biological children. They're my family, and part of the Bennett legacy." Chairman A. Whitfield leaned forward. "Alexander, while this is extraordinary news, it doesn't address the company's current instability." "Actually, it explains everything," Alexander countered. 3 weeks ago, I discovered 3 boys being exploited and abused. I didn't know then they were my nephews. I only knew they needed help." He paused, looking at each boy with undisguised affection. "I chose to protect them, even at the cost of missing meetings or disappointing investors." Lucas slipped his small hand into Alexander's, a gesture not lost on the board members. "Victoria has suggested I can't balance family and business responsibilities," Alexander continued. "But I would argue that understanding what truly matters makes me a better leader, not worse." He distributed folders containing a comprehensive restructuring plan. "Bennett Enterprises was founded on family values by my father. I propose we return to those roots with a new division focused on ethical investments in child welfare and education." Victoria's face darkened. "This is emotional manipulation, not business." "This is the future," Alexander corrected, "and a testament to what matters most." He turned to the triplets. "Boys, would you like to wait with Mrs. Patterson while we finish our discussion?" After they left, Alexander faced the board squarely. "You have a choice. Support my vision for this company moving forward with these boys as part of my life. Or accept my resignation and full divestment of shares. Effective immediately." Shocked silence followed. Alexander Bennett had never issued ultimatums, he'd never needed to. "You'd walk away from everything?" Victoria asked incredulously. "For 3 children you barely know?" Alexander's gaze was unwavering. "For my brothers, sons, for my family. Yes, without hesitation." Chairman Whitfield cleared his throat. "I believe we should review Mr. Bennett's proposal before making any decisions. Victoria, your temporary appointment was just that. Temporary." As the board meeting continued, Alexander felt a strange peace despite the corporate warfare unfolding. Whatever happened, he had, Made the right choice. Outside in the waiting area, he found the triplets drawing contentedly under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye. "Are you still the boss?" Ethan asked. Alexander smiled, realizing the answer mattered far less than it once had. "We'll see. But either way, we're going to be just fine." The peaceful routine Alexander had established with the triplets was shattered on a crisp Monday morning. Lucas, normally the first awake with boundless energy, couldn't get out of bed. "I don't feel good," he whispered, his usually rosy face alarmingly pale. Alexander placed a hand on the boy's forehead, feeling heat radiating through his palm. "You're burning up." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. "Should I call Dr. Harrison?" Before Alexander could answer, Lucas began coughing violently, each spasm racking his small frame. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, tiny specks of blood dotted his palm. "Call an ambulance," Alexander ordered, his voice tight with fear. Noah and Ethan watched wide-eyed as paramedics rushed their brother from the penthouse. "We're coming too," Noah declared, his tone brooking no argument. At the hospital, doctors whisked Lucas away while a nurse guided Alexander and the remaining triplets to a private waiting area. An hour passed in tense silence before Dr. Patel appeared, her expression grave. "Mr. Bennett, Lucas has developed severe pneumonia, complicated by an underlying condition we've just discovered. Aplastic anemia. His body isn't producing enough blood cells." Alexander felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Is he going to be okay?" "We've started aggressive treatment, but he's very ill. We need to discuss long-term options, including a possible bone marrow transplant." "Take whatever you need from me," Alexander said immediately. "It's not that simple," Dr. Patel explained gently. "Compatibility is essential. Siblings are often the best match, especially identical triplets, but they're not identical," Alexander interrupted, remembering details from the DNA tests. "They're fraternal triplets," Dr. Patel nodded. "We'll test everyone immediately." As nurses collected samples from Noah and Ethan, Alexander's phone rang incessantly. Victoria, the board, investors all demanding his attention for the emergency shareholder meeting scheduled that afternoon. "The company's future will be decided today," his CFO warned. "Without you there, Victoria will gain permanent control." Alexander stared through the glass partition where Lucas lay connected to machines, looking impossibly small and fragile. "Handle it," he replied simply, ending the call. Hours later, Dr. Patel returned with crushing news. "Neither brother is a match. We'll need to expand our search to extended family and the National Registry." "Test me," Alexander insisted. The doctor's expression was kind but doubtful. "As an uncle, the chances are—" "Test me anyway," Alexander repeated firmly. While waiting for results, he sat beside Lucas's bed, holding the boy's limp hand in his own. Noah and Ethan huddled against him, unusually quiet. "Remember when you found us that night?" Noah whispered. "Lucas said you were an angel sent by Mom." Alexander's throat tightened. "I'm no angel, Noah." "You saved us," Ethan insisted. "Now you have to save Lucas too." The simple faith in their voices nearly broke him. Alexander Bennett, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, found himself praying for the first time since childhood. Dr. Patel's return interrupted his vigil. Her expression was stunned. "Mr. Bennett, we need to talk privately." Outside Lucas's room, she showed him the test results. "This is remarkable. You're a near-perfect match, closer than would be expected for an uncle." Alexander stared at the charts, not comprehending. "Mr. Bennett," she continued carefully, "this level of compatibility suggests you might be more closely related. Are you certain you're the boy's uncle and not their father?" The genetic test results lay spread across Dr. Patel's desk, each page confirming what seemed impossible. Alexander stared at them in disbelief as the doctor explained the significance. "The compatibility is extraordinary," she said. "In identical twins, DNA is nearly identical. That means you and your brother would have essentially the same genetic markers." "So, to Lucas's immune system," Alexander began. Your cells would appear almost identical to his biological father's, Dr. Patel confirmed. It's remarkably fortunate. Without this match, finding a compatible donor could have taken months. Time Lucas doesn't have. Alexander thought back to his childhood with Michael. Identical twins raised as mirror images until Michael rejected their father's corporate path. So much of Alexander's rigid, controlled life had been defined by being the responsible twin, the one who stayed. "How soon can we do the transplant?" he asked. "We'll begin preparations immediately. The procedure itself carries risks, of course. For Lucas, there's the chance of rejection. For you, the donation process isn't pleasant." "I don't care about risks to me," Alexander interrupted. "Just save him." As Alexander returned to Lucas's room, he found Ethan and Noah curled up asleep in chairs beside their brother's bed. Their small faces, so like Michael's, appeared unusually vulnerable in sleep. The realization struck him anew. These boys weren't just his nephews. Genetically, they might as well be his sons. His phone vibrated. A message from Sophia. "Victoria, calling emergency press conference. Claiming you've abandoned company responsibilities. Board wavering in support." Another text followed. "CPS resuming investigation based on your hospital absence. Victoria suggesting unstable home environment." Alexander silenced his phone, a cold certainty settling over him. Victoria had leveraged his absence to seize control, using Lucas's illness against him. The calculated cruelty of it staggered him. Noah stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Is Lucas going to be okay?" Alexander sat beside him, drawing both Noah and the now awakening Ethan close. "I'm a match for the transplant. We're going to give Lucas some of my healthy cells to help his body get stronger." "Like a superhero transfusion?" Ethan asked, hope brightening his tired face. "Something like that." Alexander smiled. "The doctors will start tomorrow." "Will it hurt you?" Noah asked worriedly. "Not much," Alexander reassured him, though he knew the procedure would be grueling. And even if it did, it would be worth it. As the boys absorbed this news, the hospital room door opened. Victoria stood there, impeccably dressed, flanked by a man with a camera. "Quite the family drama," she observed coolly. "The board was concerned when you missed today's crucial vote. I thought I should see for myself what was more important than saving your company." Alexander rose protectively. "Get out, Victoria, and take your photographer with you." "The board voted to remove you as CEO an hour ago," Victoria continued. "I'm now in full control of Bennett Enterprises." She gestured toward Lucas. "All for a child who isn't even yours." "You're wrong," Alexander replied quietly. "They're more mine than the company ever was." The bone marrow transplant procedure left Alexander weakened but determined. For 3 days, he remained in the hospital room adjacent to Lucas's, insisting on being close despite doctors' recommendations that he rest at home. Noah and Ethan shuttled between their rooms, carrying drawings and whispered messages of encouragement. "The initial signs are promising," Dr. Patel informed Alexander on the 4th day. "Lucas's body is accepting the transplanted cells. We're cautiously optimistic." Alexander watched through the observation window as Lucas slept, his small chest rising and falling steadily beneath a tangle of monitoring wires. The boy's color had improved slightly, the first tangible sign of recovery. "Mr. Bennett," the doctor continued, "a Ms. Morgan is quite insistent about seeing you. She says it's urgent legal business." Sophia entered looking uncharacteristically, rumpled but triumphant, clutching a thick folder. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Your phone's been off." "Lucas needed me," Alexander replied simply. "Well, Victoria needed you gone," Sophia countered, opening the folder. "But she got sloppy. In her rush to seize control, she falsified board signatures and backdated documents. My investigators found everything." Alexander absorbed this news with surprising detachment. "Can we use this?" "Use it?" "Alexander, this is corporate fraud. The board has already called an emergency session to reinstate you once they saw the evidence. Victoria is being escorted from the building as we speak. Once this victory would have been everything." Now, Alexander merely nodded, his gaze returning. To Lucas. Sophia studied him with new understanding. There's more. The adoption petition has been approved. The judge was particularly moved by your medical sacrifice for Lucas. As soon as you sign these papers, they're legally your son's. This news penetrated Alexander's exhaustion. They're approved? All three? All three Bennett boys, Sophia confirmed with a rare smile. Or should I say all four? Later that evening, as Alexander sat beside Lucas's bed reading aloud from a dog-eared storybook Noah had insisted was their favorite, he became aware of being watched. Lucas's eyes were open, clear and focused for the first time in days. You stayed, the boy whispered hoarsely. Alexander set the book aside, his throat tight with emotion. Of course I stayed. Are we really going to be yours forever now? Lucas asked. Ethan said the judge said yes. If that's what you want, Alexander replied softly. Lucas's small hand found his. Can we call you Dad instead of Mr. Alexander? Noah says it's okay because you gave me your supercells. The simple question unlocked something final in Alexander's heart. The last resistance to this profound life transformation. 3 weeks ago he'd been a solitary man obsessed with corporate power. Now he was sitting in a hospital room, holding the hand of a child who carried his genetic material, who saw him as a father. I would be honored, Alexander answered, his voice rough with emotion. Outside the room, Noah and Ethan pressed their faces against the glass, watchful as always over their brother. Alexander motioned them in, opening his arms to include all three. As the triplets huddled against him, one still attached to monitors but improving, all three finally safe. Bennett understood that he hadn't just saved these boys, they had saved him too. Alexander stood in the ornate courtroom, his three sons beside him in matching suits, their dark hair neatly combed for the occasion. Lucas, still slightly pale but recovering well 6 weeks after the transplant, held tightly to his hand. Noah and Ethan flanked his other side, their expressions solemn but eyes bright with anticipation. Judge Winters reviewed the final adoption documents, occasionally glancing up to study the unusual family before her. Mr. Bennett, you understand that by signing these papers, you're accepting full legal responsibility for Noah, Ethan, and Lucas as their father? I do, Your Honor, Alexander replied with quiet confidence. The court recognizes the exceptional circumstances of this case, Judge Winters continued. The biological connection between yourself and the boys as their uncle, your medical intervention that likely saved Lucas's life, and your demonstrated commitment to their welfare despite significant professional consequences. Alexander thought, back to the tumultuous past 2 months. From finding 3 hungry boys on a rainy night, to discovering they were his brother's sons. From nearly losing his company, to nearly losing Lucas. And finally to today's culmination, legally becoming their father. I've also reviewed the statements from Child Protective Services, the judge added, including their updated assessment following Ms. Caldwell's concerning allegations. Alexander tensed slightly. Victoria's final attack had been particularly vindictive, filing complaints with CPS suggesting his home was unstable and that the children were being neglected during Lucas's hospitalization. The investigation found those allegations to be completely unfounded, Judge Winters stated firmly. In fact, Ms. Patterson's testimony and the hospital staff's observations indicate exceptional dedication to these children's welfare. She set aside the papers and looked directly at the boys. Noah, Ethan, and Lucas, I normally ask children your age if they wish to be adopted by the petitioner. However, given your clear attachment and Mr. Bennett's status as your biological uncle, I'll simply ask if you have anything you'd like to say. The brothers exchanged glances before Noah, as always, spoke for them. We want to be Bennetts, Your Honor. Alexander, our dad, found us when nobody else wanted us. When Lucas got sick, he gave him special cells to make him better. He reads us stories every night and learned how to make dinosaur pancakes even though Mrs. Patterson says he never cooked anything before. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the courtroom. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. And Noah continued seriously. He taught us that family isn't just about having the same blood. It's about who loves you no matter what. Judge Winters smiled. Well said, young man. She signed the final documents with a flourish. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby declare these adoptions final and complete. Congratulations to the Bennett family. The small audience, Mrs. Patterson, James, Sophia, and a handful of board members who had supported Alexander through everything, erupted in applause. Outside the courthouse, photographers waited, not business reporters this time, but the society pages eager to capture images of the dramatic transformation of notorious bachelor Alexander Bennett into a devoted father of triplets. What happens now, Dad? Ethan asked as they navigated through the crowd toward their waiting car. The word Dad still sent a wave of amazement through Alexander every time he heard it. 2 months ago, he'd been alone at the pinnacle of corporate power. Now his life revolved around school lunches, bedtime stories, and the daily miracle of watching 3 identical boys with their own distinct personalities grow secure in the knowledge they were loved. Now, Alexander replied, drawing all 3 boys close. We go home. 2 years had passed since the courthouse ceremony that officially made the Bennett triplets a family. Alexander stood at the back of the elementary school auditorium, watching with undisguised pride as 9-year-old Lucas stepped confidently to the podium. For our family history project, Lucas began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I wanted to share how our family came together in a way that wasn't traditional but turned out to be exactly right. Alexander caught the eyes of Noah and Ethan sitting among their classmates, their faces beaming with pride for their brother who had fully recovered and was now thriving. Lucas continued, describing how a chance encounter on a rainy night had changed all their lives forever. The journey had been far from smooth. The corporate world had initially viewed Alexander's transformation from ruthless CEO to devoted father with skepticism. Victoria had departed after the fraud scandal, starting a competing firm that ultimately failed when clients chose to remain with the new Bennett Enterprises, a company that now balanced profit with purpose. Alexander had restructured the company to allow him to be home for dinner most nights and never miss a school event. He'd launched the Michael Bennett Foundation for Children in Need, channeling significant resources into programs supporting orphaned and vulnerable children. The triplets themselves had become unofficial ambassadors, their story inspiring others to consider adoption. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside Alexander, dabbing discreetly at her eyes as Lucas described how she had taught them to make cookies and fold their clothes properly. Who would have thought, she whispered, that this would be our family? Family. The word held new depth now. Alexander's world had expanded beyond the penthouse and boardroom to include school friends' parents, pediatricians, teachers, and the small community that had formed around them. His once empty social calendar now overflowed with soccer games, science fairs, and playdates. My dad isn't really our dad biologically, Lucas explained to the rapt audience. He's our uncle, but he gave me his bone marrow cells when I was sick, so now I have some of his DNA too. The scientific accuracy was questionable, but the sentiment made Alexander smile. Our real dad was his identical twin brother who died before we were born. But sometimes life gives you second chances to find your family. As the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, Alexander felt a presence beside him. He turned to find Chairman Whitfield, now retired but still a mentor. Quite the change from the Alexander Bennett I knew 3 years ago, Whitfield observed. The board was convinced you'd lost your mind, you know. Taking in 3 street children, stepping back from operations, restructuring the entire company. Philosophy. Best insanity I've ever experienced, Alexander replied, watching as the triplets ran toward him, Lucas clutching his A-plus project. Dad, did you see? They called in near unison, still sharing that uncanny triplet synchronicity. I saw everything, Alexander assured them, kneeling to accept their enthusiastic embraces. I'm so proud of all of you. That evening as they walked home through the park, Alexander having moved them from the sterile penthouse to a brownstone with a small garden, Noah asked the question that had been building all day. Dad, do you ever miss your old life? when you were just focused on business and didn't have to worry about us? Alexander considered the question seriously. I thought I had everything then. Success, wealth, power. But I was missing the most important thing. What's that? Ethan asked. This, Alexander replied simply, gesturing to encompass all of them. Family, purpose, love. Lucas slipped his hand into Alexander's. Mom would be happy we found you. I think so too, Alexander agreed, looking up at the evening sky. Somewhere, he liked to believe Michael was watching, perhaps had even guided these three boys to the one person who could save them, who would in turn be saved by them. As they reached their home, warm light spilling from windows that no longer looked out on emptiness, Alexander Bennett, once defined solely by corporate conquests, now measured by bedtime stories and homework, felt a completeness he had never known possible. His legacy wasn't the company that bore his name. It was these three boys who carried his brother's features but had carved their own place in his heart. They had taught him what truly mattered, transforming a man who once had everything into someone who finally had enough. The familiar sound of their front door opening brought Alexander back to the present moment. The boys raced ahead, dropping backpacks and shoes in the entryway, a casual chaos that once would have irritated him, but now simply signified life. Remember to hang up your jackets, he called after them, the routine reminder part of the comforting rhythm of their days together. As Alexander entered his study, now decorated with framed artwork from the boys alongside family photographs, he found an unexpected envelope on his desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping showing him and the Triplets at the recent foundation fundraiser, along with a handwritten note. Michael would be proud of all of you. V. Victoria. The reconciliation had been slow and tentative, starting 6 months ago when she had approached him at a business conference, visibly humbled by her professional failures and personal regrets. For the sake of what they had once meant to each other, and for Michael's memory, Alexander had cautiously allowed her back into their periphery. Dad? Ethan appeared in the doorway, now the most thoughtful and observant of the Triplets. Is everything okay? Alexander tucked the note away. Everything's perfect. Later that night, after homework was reviewed, dinner eaten amid animated conversation, and the nightly bedtime ritual of stories and goodnight hugs completed, Alexander sat on the terrace watching the city lights. James, no longer just security but now a trusted friend and occasional uncle to the boys, joined him with 2 glasses of scotch. 3 years ago today, James said, handing Alexander a glass. The night of the rainstorm when you found them. Alexander hadn't realized the significance of the date. 3 years, he marveled. Sometimes it feels like they've always been here. And sometimes, James chuckled, it seems like yesterday you were calling me in a panic because Lucas had flushed a toy car down the toilet. They shared a laugh, comfortable in the silence that followed. You know, James said eventually, in all my years of security work, I've protected billionaires, celebrities, politicians, never seen any of them truly happy. Not like you are now. Alexander considered this. His life was undeniably more chaotic, more challenging, and infinitely more rewarding than before. The company was thriving under the new vision he'd implemented, proving that purpose and profit could coexist. The foundation work brought meaning beyond financial success. But most importantly, down the hall slept 3 boys who called him Dad, who had healed the wound left by Michael's death, who had taught him that real legacy wasn't measured in buildings or bank accounts but in lives changed and love given. I used to think success was about what you build, Alexander said quietly. Now I know it's about who you become. The following morning, as he prepared breakfast, another skill he'd mastered out of necessity, Alexander listened to the familiar sounds of the Triplets getting ready for school, their playful bickering and laughter filling the house. When they finally tumbled into the kitchen, hair still damp from showers, he was struck anew by how much they'd grown and how deeply they'd changed him. What's for breakfast, Dad? Noah asked, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Dinosaur pancakes, Alexander replied with a grin, remembering his early disastrous attempts at this now perfected specialty. As they ate together in the morning sunlight, Alexander Bennett, no longer defined by his wealth or power but by the love he gave and received, knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true purpose. Not in the empire he had built, but in the family he had found on a rainy night when he had finally looked beyond himself and opened his heart to three boys who needed him as much as he, without knowing it, had needed them.